You still here? Mike Carlin. I want to make sure we get the mic in here, the live mic, so she can read off of it. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know where everybody is this morning who usually come in person, by the way, too. So, I'm not sure where those folks are yet. We were looking at the. I wanted to tell people, yeah, it says there were 13 people that watched Jonah in the concluding, at least as so far. There's 13 people that watched Jonah in concluding stuff, and then as far as people who watched Yom Kippur morning, about 45 people, and Kol Nidre.
Oh, should we get the wireless mic for the...
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. I was going to ask Mike, because I think Mike took it. Thanks. And Kol Nidre, we had 14 people. I think he's in the classroom. I think he went up to the classroom. So we've got, I'm not sure. Rosemary, trust me, we usually have more people in person. I don't know if people thought I was sleeping in today, which is what a lot of rabbis do today. This day is oftentimes
She would take it off, but
the rabbinic.
said you were gonna be.
I know, and originally she put, Mike Schwartz actually caught it, that it said that next week it was at October 2nd and 3rd, which was just an oversight on her part. Shelley knew what she was doing. She just accidentally put next week's, but I was worried that some people would have thought we didn't have class this week, and so she sent out a correction right afterwards that didn't say what was corrected, but it
Didn't.
was like
Because I didn't read it carefully enough to catch the
people wouldn't have known it. But yeah, that was where the error was. It said October 2nd and 3rd for this week's classes. So, Mike, do we have the wireless?
No,
the handle?
no, but you can have a wired one. One on a wire.
Oh, okay.
One on a cable, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, we need it in here today. So Mike is actually here. Mike Carlin is here this morning to help set up for Sukkot, for our service outside, which unfortunately I mentioned at services, he's going to be out of town, so he's allowed a break. But this one is one of the more complicated. This is the most complicated.
That's because I never go home.
Mike is here all the
I
time.
just sleep in the back.
He sleeps here at the building. But we've got, we could actually, oh no, you have the other wireless mic, I was gonna say.
Hey,
We have,
long time no see.
there he is. I was hoping he was gonna be ready to go, John, but he slept in today. John, yeah, he's late. What would happen if you were, what would happen if you were in a barracks and you rose late?
First of all,
Be a lot of push-ups, I
I
think.
was the officer, so don't follow me. Where's the song stand?
Oh, we're using them. I've got the.
Yeah, just bring in one.
I'll stand there.
No, just,
That's all right.
no, he's got a new Bible. Otherwise he won't see it. Otherwise he can't see it.
I'm
Yeah.
all ready for today.
He's all ready to go. There is some lights back here that are not on. We can turn them on. Yeah, the back ones are on. But it's yeah, I don't know. Everyone's late. Everyone's having a late start today.
Sorry.
I don't. No, it's not just. I didn't say it's not just. It's not just you. Everybody was dragging this morning, but we're up on Facebook.
Mary wasn't dragging. She had to
No,
get up
she was here. Well, no, she was here.
I
She
was
stayed
here. I
overnight
stayed in
here.
town.
She didn't. She didn't drive from Santa Paula.
I did
Come
not
on.
drive from Santa Paula.
That would be pretty amazing. But yeah, she gave a great appeal yesterday, and hopefully
I've done it before, but I'm getting older.
she's here to.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's. But again, she did a great job getting everybody.
All about dog poop.
Everyone's going to remember it. That's all I can
You're
tell
gonna
you.
remember it. Now all you have to do is remember to put something in the envelope.
In the
and I'll
envelope.
I was gonna put dog poop in here.
Please don't do that.
Well, Rosemary, with all due respect, you're not opening the envelopes. It's never. You're never going to. I mean, thank you for your concern, but yes, thankfully you're not going to open that. But yeah, it's
That wasn't the effect I was looking for.
Yeah, I don't have any, here you go.
But we had a.
I was just hoping I wouldn't make a Freudian error when I said ownership.
Well, that was a nice. It was a nice change. Originally, it was just poop.
No, it wasn't.
So, but yeah, it's important to use dramatic symbols to get the message across, which is exactly what Ezekiel is all about. Yeah, using dramatic symbols. That's what.
And he talks about excrement.
Oh, he did. And again, I was looking at different sources after our class last week over whether it was real, like the poop was in the food or it was used for the food. Most people agree that it was not necessarily in the food, but close. You know, using it is definitely creating a situation where you're increasing the chances that a little poop gets in the food. So there's no question that it's dangerous, but not the fact that he like ate it with the poop. But yeah, his point is people in Jerusalem are going to eat a lot of bad, have to eat things even worse than that. So that's what we were reading last week, how he was using these dramatic symbols, including, again, I mean, talk about the fire that he made, or the poop fire he made, whatever, but he actually, the bigger issue is that for a year he lays on his side, symbolizing Jerusalem being laid siege to. And I mean, that's a little bit more, if somebody gave me a choice between using poop to make a fire to bake bread or laying on my side for a year, I would definitely take the poop fire, me personally. So it doesn't even compare to having to lay on your side for a year outside in the elements. And so, yeah, he's called on to do some pretty heavy duty stuff. We read about Jeremiah being in jail, being under house arrest, having his freedoms taken away. It's pretty bad too. That was more of a consequence of what he did rather than to prove to people what he was trying to say. It wasn't like, he was performing. He was just really arrested. But the lives of prophets were not easy. And Isaiah's description of a suffering servant, if it applied to him, was pretty heavy too. So, So Glory's not joining us this morning, Sean?
No.
Well, if she comes on virtually, there's going to be an interesting thing that we're going to look at today that has to do with, you'll see when we get to it. But we're going to be starting in chapter 7 of Ezekiel. We'll take a look at what he has to say. Yesterday we read Jonah, and we talked a little bit about Jonah, who doesn't suffer quite like these guys do, in the sense that God doesn't tell him to do what he does. He does it on his own, and he suffers accordingly. But yeah, his life wasn't easy either as a prophet. And so he spent some time inside a fish. He obviously was on a near-death experience on a ship.
What if he ate fish after that?
Yeah, it's a good question, whether he liked it, whether he could ever smell fish again. Right. I would have thought no, but there's actually a midrash that he got a little too comfortable inside the fish.
He was in there for quite a while, right?
He was in there for 3 days.
Yeah.
The problem is that it doesn't say he immediately started praying. There's also another weird linguistic thing. I think we might have mentioned it in the many times we've talked about Jonah, it might have come up. gosh, how could I talk about something else about Jonah? Well, we kind of rushed through it yesterday, but it didn't matter. When we got to the last couple chapters we did in 5 minutes. But
'Cause that's always interesting.
I always try to get to the end part, and we never get to the end part fast enough. So I actually kind of rushed through the first part, and then we still got stuck on a piece that was important. I mean, we got into important discussion. But, so one of the things about Jonah is it says in one line that he was in the belly of the fish. Actually, I'll show you.
That second
I'll
chapter is
show you.
always very interesting.
Yeah, well, I will.
You're right.
I will show you and it says right here, the great fish. But here's the Hebrew, because you got to kind of see the Hebrew. So here's the line. So it says, Jonah. So it says right here in Hebrew. Look at chapter 2 up here. It says, God provided a huge fish, as we said before. It doesn't say whale. It's this dagadol. But here I can show you the Hebrew. That's why I do it. And it says, and Jonah remained in the fish's belly 3 days and 3 nights. Hadag, shlosha yamim. Then it says, Jonah prayed to the Eternal from the belly of the fish, which assumes that like he didn't do it until the 3rd day. So he said, he cried out, right? And then that's where the song is on page 2, right? Wait. Wait, I'm missing I skipped over it, sorry. It's at the first time that the fish is mentioned. Hold it a second. Oh, here it is. So in the first line it says 2 times dog. Vayaman Adonai dog, and then it says B'mei hadag, shlosha yamim, right? And then it says that Vayitpael Yonah el Adonai Elohav mima'e hadaga. So let me see if they actually shows you the midrash. I'll just show you this. See if Rashi talks about it. Nope, it's not in there. Let me just see if it's in here. No. Okay, so here's the thing, where it comes from. So in the first line it says dog, and in the second place it says daga. Now, the rabbis interpret this as that it was a female fish,
Yeah, that's female, right?
right? Because daga is, the hay at the end is a female. Now, it's also linguistic. It may not have been a female fish, but hadaga means also from within the fish. Hadaga, so it says from the belly of the fish. So linguistically, it also could have said hadaga, like from there. But the rabbis interpreted the difference between dog and daga, that Jonah was in the belly of a male fish for the first days. He was very comfortable in the belly of the fish because it was kind of like a little vacation for him, a little getaway inside the belly of the fish. There was a lot of space. Then God said he's not getting it, and so the fish, male fish, spit him into a female fish. And when he was in the belly of the female fish, there were all the caviar in that fish, and there was a lot of stuff in that female fish, and he was uncomfortable in the female fish. And so that's when he started praying, when he was in the female fish. And that's why it goes from a male fish to a female fish. So the midrash is while he was underwater, he got spit into one. It also doesn't even have to be a scribal error. It could just be the way the Hebrew. But the rabbis like this idea that Jonah was actually comfortable even in the fish, which isn't in the text, but it is implied by the fact that he doesn't seem to care that he's inside a fish or not. Again, he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing, and he doesn't start praying until assumedly the 3rd day, and that's when he gets spit out. It takes him 3 days to come around, and so the rabbi said, why did it take him 3 days? And so that's the midrash on that he was actually in the belly. I only brought it up. I brought it up because of Mike's interesting question that did he ever like fish again after being inside the fish? But yeah, I don't know. I think we might have talked about that a long, long time ago, that little midrash about Jonah being inside a fish.
Yeah, we might have.
But there you go. Definitely still thinking about Jonah. So, as we read Ezekiel, who came a little bit after, chronologically, a little bit after Jonah, about 100 years or so, 150 years or so after, let's take a look at what he does, or what he sees, more importantly, in chapter 7. So, Rosemary is here live in person. For those who are watching us on Facebook right now, there's a live Rosemary in our building right now. An actual Rosemary. Okay.
The word of God came to me. You, O mortal, say, thus said the sovereign God to the land of Israel, doom, doom is coming upon the four corners of the land. Now doom is upon you. I will let loose my anger against you and judge you according to your ways. I will requite you for all your abominations. I will show you no pity and no compassion, but I will requite you for your ways and for the abominations in your midst, and you shall know that I am God.
Excellent. Mike, are we sure we have audio, by the way, for Rosemary's mic? Hello?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. You can hear Rosemary. Thank you, Elise. Thanks for coming. So, as we've talked about several times, God refers to Ezekiel as Ben Adam, which we have translated as mortal, which again the King James translates as son of man. So every time you see that word, Ben Adam, that is the phrase that's used to describe Ezekiel. Ezekiel's called the son of man, which we said later on in Christianity becomes an important term for, again, whether that's a special phrase or whether it's one that just means a human being. So this is definitely a scary prophecy. The word doom is used over and over again. The word in Hebrew here is the word ketz, which is the word he just keeps repeating. It's a poetic style that he's going to employ, and he's going to employ it in the next chapter as well with slightly different word. But again, when we think about prophets screaming at people, somebody's screaming at people, doom, doom, disaster, whatever, just using the word over and over again, it's not uncommon.
King James uses the word end.
End, yeah, even more of that, when you hear that, the end is coming, somebody with a sign, by the, over on the street. Yes?
All this time that I've been doing this, I don't remember the question being asked, I don't remember asking it. When God is speaking to a prophet, it's not in English, it's in Hebrew?
Yeah. Yeah, there's no,
It's
yeah.
English at the time.
No.
So it's Hebrew.
English
Yeah.
wasn't around then.
And that was substantiated by the recovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Well, we always knew that Hebrew was the only language that this possibly could have been in, right? So, it's not like anybody didn't know what language it was, right? So people knew this was the language they spoke in Israel at the time. This was, every other later translation was, a translation. Every other, version of this. The only other language that we find in the Hebrew Bible is Aramaic. There's a few chapters of the book of Daniel that are in Aramaic, but 99% of the Bible is written in Hebrew. So every translation you ever see in the world, to some extent, has to go back to the Hebrew. Do all of them go back to the Hebrew? Yes and no. I think lately people have tried to recapture the Hebrew as much as possible. I think there were some translations maybe 100 years ago where they were more concerned with how they were translating the English, like updating the English rather than, are we still capturing what the original Hebrew meant? So, but the King James is a very good translation. The King James still, to some extent, is one of the best translations, even 400 years later. We have to step back and go, they got it right, not only because they consulted Hebrew scholars at the time, so they talked to Jews and made sure that the words were the right words, but they tried to capture what was the English language at the time, which is still remarkably the English that we're still speaking for the most part. It's still a great translation. I mean, it also shows how little English has really changed, if you think about it, in the last 400 years.
So, Old Hebrew versus what we read today,
Yeah.
that's a lot different?
It's more different. It's more different than the English of Shakespeare than it is. It's maybe closer to Old English from Chaucer, or from maybe closer to 700-800 years ago than it is. I mean, English went through a major.
Old English is Beowulf, Middle English is Chaucer.
Yeah, Middle English. Yeah, and
Now-
Beowulf maybe even.
Beowulf, you can't really
Yeah,
read unless you study it.
Yeah, I would say you would.
I can't anyway.
Hebrew, modern Hebrew, and biblical Hebrew take a modern Hebrew speaker, an Israeli who has to go back and start studying Torah, to really wrap their heads around the Hebrew of the Bible. It'd take them a few weeks. That's it.
So you can read both?
Yeah, but I probably today, it's harder for me to think about biblical Hebrew because I've spent the last 40 years of my life speaking modern Hebrew.
Right.
And it was only the first 10 years of my life when I was at day school where I had teachers teaching me biblical Hebrew at least as much as they were teaching me modern Hebrew. And so, but I didn't have any like great biblical Hebrew teachers. I just was reading, most of the Hebrew I read was Bible. So you just by nature, just by natural whatever exposure, pick up the style and the more importantly the conjugation and those kind of things. But once you break out the conjugation, once you can like understand the way modern Hebrew is conjugated, I mean, Israelis must get it real quick because as an American, I got it pretty quick, and they must have gotten it. They must get it much quicker
But how
than
does
we do.
God speak to you in modern?
Modern Hebrew. God speaks to me in Akkadian, and unfortunately, I never learned Akkadian, so I have no idea what he's saying. He speaks to me in Mandarin, and I understand none of it. No, that would be the joke. Well, we'll talk about that maybe. But so that's the word doom, ketz, ba ketz, and it's like ketz ba, doom is coming. Then ba ketz hakai, hey kates. It's the like you can't even like the word ketz was used there. They didn't even translate. I mean, there's not a great way to translate hakates, hey kates. It's the same word, right? You can see that. So it's like doom is dooming. We don't have a word for that in English, but that would be the verb, the doom. I mean, what does the King James say for that? They probably tried to convey that.
Okay, where are you looking?
Verse 7. Or no, verse 6, sorry.
Verse 6.
Uh-huh.
An end is come, the end is come. It watches for thee, behold, it is come.
Yeah, it doesn't do it. It doesn't. We don't have a word for it in English. There is no verb dooming. That's what it is. The doom comes, the doom is coming, the doom is dooming on us. The doom is dooming on us, is what it actually would say. Hine ba, here it comes. So, yeah, it's much more powerful in biblical Hebrew. And I guess to get to John's question, if we knew Hebrew and by the way, I don't even know if in modern Hebrew, for example, this word hakeets is used. I don't even know if that's I don't know if that's transferred over into modern Hebrew as a word, like disaster. It's disastering right now. I don't know. I don't think it is, but I'm not sure. Here's another word that we're going to get some play off of or repetition at least. Here it is. Verse 7. Rosemary?
But we didn't read.
Oh, we didn't read 6? Oh, sorry. I did.
I wrote it. Thus said the sovereign God, a singular disaster, a disaster is coming. Doom is coming. The hour of doom is coming. It stirs against you. There it comes. The cycle has come around for you, O inhabitants of the land. The time has come. The day is near. There is panic on the mountains, not joy.
By the way, how does the King James translate the cycle? What does it say for the cycle?
Now, where exactly?
Verse 7. Something has come.
The morning has come.
The morning? Yeah, you see, it's a different word completely.
How would you translate it then?
Well, let me ask you. Well, let's keep reading and let's see how you would
Scroll says the dawn.
Yeah, it's definitely connected. The Hebrew, we believe the Hebrew is more connected to a morning time. But let's read the repetition of it, and then you see why it says the cycle. Well, I mean, maybe you'd not agree with that translation, but let's keep going. Let's see how it repeats.
Very soon I will pour out my wrath upon you and spend my anger on you. I will judge you according to your ways, and I will requite you for all your abominations. I will show you no pity and no compassion, but I will requite you for your ways and for the abominations in your midst, and you shall know it was I, God, who punished. Here is the day. See, the cycle has come round. It has appeared. The rod has blossomed. Arrogance has budded. Lawlessness has grown into a rod of wickedness. Nothing comes of them, nor of their abundance, nor of their wealth, nor is there preeminence among them.
I think that might be the end of that. No, we'll go a little bit further.
The time has come. The day has arrived. Let not the buyer rejoice, nor the seller mourn, for divine wrath shall overtake all Jerusalem's multitude.
Yeah, I think that's the end of the word. I don't think it's going to keep popping back up. So if we look at the word that they translated as, again, here it is, the cycle, hatzfirah, tzfirah, which they translated as a cycle. We would say maybe, and again, it's there. It's right here. The cycle has come around. I don't know. I mean, you can see why it's connected to day because it says hayom, right? The day. Here is the day. I think why they see it's a cycle is because there seems to be more of a seasonal aspect to this than just the day, in the sense that when it says that the rod has blossomed, let me just see if it says anything for that. No, I mean these are just
Really think about it.
these are just
Day is
commentary.
the cycle also.
Yeah, but I think they felt that it sounds like it's more of, look, I like the word mourning because it doesn't, it could be, it's more poetic, but it sounds more poetic to me. But I think that they like the idea of it's happening, like the time has come, not like on a specific day, that it's like, okay, but now the time is arrived for the destruction, and we've come back. I mean, this is the cycle now. We've come to the time where this is happening. And so rather than it's like one day, it's now. It's more of a time.
We're past the eve of destruction.
Correct. And that's what Ezekiel, you're going to see from the rest of this, what it is. I just want to point out one thing that he throws this out here, which is, I think, an interesting phrase. The time has come, the day has arrived, right? And there's that, the time has come, the day has arrived. It's both,
Hold on.
like a long, not necessarily like a day, but the hour, the time, the moment. We use those words today. We don't mean like literally, hey, this is one moment, but like 1 second, but we mean it's now here. The moment has come. A moment literally means a second, right? I don't know what the exact definition of how they came up with the word moment. I don't know the origin of that word. But we say the moment has arrived. We don't mean it's like literally this second. We mean the time has come. But here's the interesting phrase here. Let not the buyer rejoice, nor the seller mourn. Because, again, he says, it doesn't matter. Whoever is rejoicing or because they bought or sold, they're all going to be mourning. But this is a really interesting idea about a seller's remorse. Why does a seller mourn? And, the commentary, and you don't really need to see like a specific commentary because it makes sense. Anyone who's ever sold something and then regretted selling it understands what this means. So if you've had a house, usually we're talking about property, but it could be anything that you have of value that you didn't create with the intent to sell necessarily, but the time came to sell it and you sold it, then you felt bad about it afterwards. That's what he's talking about. Seller's remorse, right? Now buyer's remorse, because buyer's remorse happens when you buy something and turns out you got the wrong thing. That's bad. Now, there is going to be buyer's remorse here because they're not going to be happy either. But it's an interesting thing that he's talking about, like in a normal situation, the buyer rejoices and the seller is sad. He's saying it isn't going to matter now because anybody in Jerusalem is going to be stuck. If you bought a house this year and you're real happy that you bought a house, you're going to be sad. If you're sad because you sold your house, you got nothing to be sad about because, it's going to be destroyed. You wouldn't have had it anyways. So it's a very interesting phrase that he uses because I don't know that, like most people really think about what that phrase really means, but it is a natural human emotion that people who buy and sell oftentimes feel that way when they've bought and sold. That's the way that things normally happen. Again, sometimes the seller feels like he walked away and he goes, I sold that for a lot of money. I feel good. I walked away from it. I don't have to think about it anymore. But that's not the usual situation. Either a seller had to sell and they're not happy that they had to sell. They would like to have kept that thing too. Or they sell it and they go, maybe I didn't get enough for it. That's what a lot of sellers feel. Like, oh, if I could have waited another 6 months. I think anyone who's ever sold a house in a hot housing market has always said, oh, if I could have only stayed there if I had only stayed another year, I could have made another $100,000. People do that, and that's what he's talking about. There's not going to be any of that. So, here's what it says.
For the seller shall not return to what was sold, so long as both parties remain among the living. For the vision concerns all her multitude, it shall not be revoked. And because of their own guilt, none shall hold fast to their life.
And there it says right there, there's not going to be any, God is not stepping back from this, right? This is not going to stop. There's no turning back, right? It will not be revoked. Lo yashuv, right? There will be no teshuvah. There is no teshuvah. This is the hard part of what Ezekiel's telling people. He's telling them, there's nothing you can do. It's already done. Here we go.
They have sounded the horn, and all is prepared, but no one goes to battle, for my wrath is directed against all her multitude.
By the way, before we go, look at that. That's the word tekiah, right? Taku batoka. So somebody asked me yesterday, what does the word tekiah mean? I said it means literally to blow the horn, to sound the horn. Takaba shofar means the sound that you make. You blow a sound. That's what tekiah means. It is a sound that comes out anytime you blow a sound. So here it doesn't actually use the word, shofar, but it just says we've blown the horn. Yeah.
The sword is outside, and pestilence and famine are inside. Those in the field shall die by the sword. Those in the town shall be devoured by famine and pestilence. And if any survive, they shall take to the mountains. They shall be like doves of the valley, moaning together, every one for their own iniquity.
And there we have those three things together again. Same three things we've seen, right? Cherev, Dever, and Ra'av. Sword, pestilence, and famine. We've seen it in Jeremiah. We see it here too. Those three things. Sometimes the fourth thing that's added to it is exile. Exile. Sometimes, again, death is also in the equation of one of the four things too, that looks like separate from that, but it's usually not. And again, the fourth as death would be the four horsemen of the apocalypse. For us, it's usually sword, pestilence, famine, exile. Those are the four horsemen for us. I think for Christians, exile didn't really mean anything, right? Leaving Jerusalem, leaving, one home that was your home base, your home temple, didn't really mean anything to them. So including that as one of the four horsemen later on by the time of the book of Revelations, which is a fairly late book, kind of gives you an idea that they weren't thinking about that anymore. That was not in the minds of those people that what are we really worried about? Which, if you think about it, death as the last of the four horsemen, is kind of like, well, it's death. Well, all of these things are death. I'm not saying death, it's almost like, but those are all death anyways. So each one of the horsemen is a death sentence to some extent. So it's almost like,
Well, it's kind of saying, even if you don't die of
Those
sword,
three,
famine, and pestilence, you're still gonna die.
yeah. Though, again, each of those things were personifications of a way to die. It's very clear because it says so right here. Those in the field shall die by the sword. It's not like a sword is going to be waved around you or you're going to get cut with the sword or the sword is scary. The sword's going to kill you. So it's all, they're all bad. Every one of these is death. And so, yeah, the fourth horseman being death is like everything dies. But for us, these were the things that we were like, well, these are the destructions that we're going to get. Here, you don't really get the exile, though it does say that the remnants, the people who were surviving, are, there's not much left. They're pretty much bad. It's pretty bad.
Christianity was for 650 years.
No, exactly. But by the time that the mythology of these, gets to be like, can they be personified? It wasn't like a next day thing. But yeah, over the next 600 years, as people kind of personified these images, people got.
But a lot of this is so broad.
Correct,
that I could say,
but the mythology of it develops, right? So the people have been reading this for 600 years by the time of Christianity. And so they've also been influenced by Greco-Roman philosophy and by dualistic philosophies from the Persians and all these other things. By the time that you get to Jesus and into the book of Revelations, now people are starting to personify these things like really heavily. And it's not just by then, again, Christians. They did it because Jews were. We see it in the rabbinic writings that these things to some extent get personified as images. But yes, here they're not necessarily images yet. But you can see how they can be. You can see how they're gonna be. Because when it says the sword is outside, it seems as though they're not talking about it just like a guy is holding the sword. Pestilence is and famine are inside.
I thought he meant inside the walls.
They're inside the cities, right? They're inside the cities. Famine and pestilence are inside the cities. The swords are out the people who aren't in the cities. Those people are already dying by being attacked. So these are, but you can see how people start to see them as entities almost, as embodiments, or again, use the word avatars, that they become like entities. So it's very visual, even now.
All hands shall grow weak, and all knees shall turn to water. They shall gird on sackcloth, and horror shall cover them. Every face shall betray shame, and every head shall be made bald. They shall throw their silver into the streets, and their gold shall be treated as something unclean. Their silver and gold shall not avail to save them in the day of God's wrath, to satisfy their hunger or to fill their stomachs, because they made them stumble into guilt. For out of their beautiful adornments, in which they took pride, they made their images and their detestable abominations. Therefore, I will make their adornments a source of uncleanness to them.
Yeah, so they were using all their gold and silver to make up idols. And so all their gold and silver will be worth nothing because that's what they were doing with them. It's a very visual and very powerful message. Yeah, you have all this wealth that you're proud of. It's going to be worth nothing because you can't buy food. And again, you use that money to make idols.
I will give them as spoil to strangers, and as plunder to the wicked of the earth, and they shall defile them. I will turn my face from them, and my treasures shall be defiled. Ruffians shall invade it and defile it. Forge the chain, for the land is full of bloody crimes, and the city is full of lawlessness. I will bring in the worst of the nations to take possession of their houses. So shall I turn to naught the pride of the powerful, and their sanctuaries shall be defiled. Horror comes, and they shall seek safety, but there shall be none. Calamity shall follow calamity, and rumor follow rumor. Then they shall seek vision from the prophet in vain. Instruction shall perish from the priest, and counsel from the elders. The king shall mourn, the prince shall clothe himself with desolation, and the hands of the people of the land shall tremble. I will treat them in accordance with their own ways, and judge them according to their deserts, and they shall know that I am God.
Yep. So you can see this is what Ezekiel is being told is going to happen in Jerusalem. Remember, he's not in Jerusalem. He's already in exile. But he's being told of what's going to happen. And this is what, this is what's going to play out. And God says, I'm going to let my own treasures be taken away. He says the temple, essentially will be looted. And, this is going to be the, this is the punishment for these people. This is what, this is what's going to happen. So, you can understand that, that this is a pretty scary stuff. One of the lines in here that's very interesting for people who are familiar with Christianity and the big levels of Christianity. Here's the famous line that's oftentimes quoted where it says, you shall hear wars and rumors of wars, for nation shall rise against nation, right? There shall be famines, pestilence, earthquakes. Yeah. Notice what it says, wars and rumors of wars. Sounds a lot like what we're reading in Ezekiel. Mm-hmm. Seems as though, again, a lot of the Hebrew Bible is there, and people, again, don't really recognize it. But yes, there's a lot of Ezekiel in the book of Revelations, and in the darker visions. That one wasn't from Revelation, so there was a version of that in Revelations too. Actually, I'll show you.
They're already in exile, so what exactly is he talking about?
He's talking about people who are sitting in outside of Jerusalem, and he's telling them, don't think about going back.
Gotcha.
Don't think about going back, and don't think that you're necessarily in the wrong place. So, here's the line I'll show you from Revelations. So people, people look at that. People look at the Christian Bible and don't realize that the darkest, even the darkest prophecies from the Christian Bible actually come in many ways from the Hebrew Bible. Here's the line in Book of Revelations. Let me just bring it up there. And again, it's not. Ew. I mean, the Book of Revelations essentially is all, scary stuff, but no, I don't think this one is. I don't think this one is that close to it. But yeah. So yeah, we're going to get to some of the other parts of this that are definitely part of our apocalyptic literature, and then become part of Christian apocalyptic literature, which means they become part of our American apocalyptic literature, since American apocalyptic literature is really based more on the Christian stuff than necessarily Jewish stuff, but since it came from the Jewish stuff, I guess you could say it really comes from the Jewish stuff. So let's continue with chapter 8, and it'll be very clear where Jeremiah is when this kind of stuff is happening. Now, we don't know that the previous chapter necessarily came around this time, but this actually tells us flat out when it happens.
In the 6th year, on the 5th day of the 6th month, I was sitting at home, and the elders of Judah were sitting before me, and there the hand of the sovereign God fell upon me.
Okay, hold it 1 second. So before we move, so what's going on here? We assume this means the 6th year of his exile. Now, this is about a year after he had the vision of the chariot, chapter 1. So that happened, it says, in the 5th year of his exile. He was 25 years old when he was taken away. That vision happens to him when he's on his 30th birthday, around his 30th birthday, and this is a year later. Okay? By the way, we didn't mention this when we read chapter 1 because there was so much else going on. There's so many other things to think about in chapter 1. I left out one thing for those who were here, and for those who aren't here today. I apologize because I really should have said this. There's an interesting thing about Ezekiel having that vision when he was 30 years old. He's a priest. He's living in Babylon. He's living in exile. This says by the Chebar Canal when he has that vision. He's 30 years old. So he's in the prime of his life. We know that. But there's something even more significant than that. He's 30 years old. He's a priest. This is when he was supposed to start working. So this guy, who, if he was back in Jerusalem, if things were the way they were supposed to be, he was supposed to start his job as a Kohen. 30 years old is when you start. So he's spending the day that he essentially should have been starting to work in exile, knowing that, and essentially God telling him, you're never going to have that job. It's not for you. It ain't going to happen. That's a pretty hard thing to think about. Well, on the other hand, he does get to see God, but...
Not many prophets that are also priests, though, are there?
No, we said there were. Jeremiah
That's right.
and Isaiah. Technically, the three prophets we've read are priests. For the other prophets, not as common.
I guess that's what I mean.
So when we get into the other 12 prophets, but these first three, these big three we mentioned, these are guys who are not only prophets, they're connected.
Yeah.
Ezekiel, we don't... What?
He got a quick promotion, he got a battlefield promotion.
Who? Ezekiel? Because he got to see God.
Yeah,
But huge tasks, but that was not the task he was supposed to have. He was supposed to be, to use that analogy, he was supposed to be having a cushy desk job in DC. In DC. Some people will, most people will. But there's also people who are going to be told, and again, to use that analogy though, that you'll never go home, that you'll never have that job, that there is no way that job, because soon the building's destroyed. There's no city there anymore. There is no job for you. There is no promotion. There will never be the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You'll never have that job.
You're never going to the Pentagon because it's not going to be
There's
there.
not going to be a
It was
Pentagon.
supposed to be that way, right? He was supposed to scare them into,
Too late.
Too late.
Jeremiah and Ezekiel are already, they're literally telling people it's too late. So that's even worse because they're being told basically, you got to tell everybody, you just got to buckle down. And their job is to literally tell people, ride it out. Ride it out. Don't worry. Don't lose faith. Don't go back to that way when you go back. But these guys are being told, the best you can do is just give comfort to the people who are sitting there and tell them, don't even think about going back. Don't even think about going back because as we know, it didn't stop. And the Jews continue to revolt, and you have the Gedaliah assassination and revolt. You have more death and destruction coming, and people are like, well, what do we do? They want a message of hope. And the best we have right now is Jeremiah and Ezekiel telling people, it's going to take a while. You're probably not going to live to see it. Nobody wants to hear that. So it's a tough job. Yeah, he does get a promotion, but the promotion, there's no way, there's nothing, when he's done with this job, with this work, the best he can say is he kept people alive, which is a great thing. I mean, don't get me wrong. Look, we're still talking about Ezekiel 2,700 years later. The priests who served in the temple, for the most part, unless they did something really good or really bad, we have no idea who they were. And usually, for the most part, it's only when they really did anything bad. We don't really know about any of those priests. Unless they had a really, really good timing. They happen to be a priest during Solomon's time or David's time, or again, one of these priests who does something very special during Josiah's time. We don't know. And we know a couple bad priests too, but for the most part, we don't know these guys. We know him though. So he ended up becoming much more famous than most of his priestly relatives. So here's the vision that he has with these people, because it's going to remind us a little bit of that vision of the chariot.
As I looked, there was a figure that had the appearance of fire. From what appeared as the loins down, there was fire, and from the loins up, the appearance was resplendent and had the color of amber.
And there's that word again, hashmal, which they translate here as amber. And again, it keeps saying over and over again, the appearance of. It doesn't say it was. It didn't say this is what it was. It says the appearance of. So he's doing his best to describe it. Some people want us to know that it's not real. He's seen a vision of this, right? So it doesn't say here that he was dreaming per se, but the fact that it keeps using the word demut, that it appeared as it, is a little different than just saying that's what it was. So that gives us a little bit of wiggle room for people who don't like the fact that this sounds really, really pagan.
Sounds really Persian.
Very Persian, very much what people would have described other kinds of things like in those days that were their cultural atmosphere. But the word appearance gives us a little wiggle room. Yeah.
The form of a hand stretched out and took me by the hair of my head. A spirit lifted me up between heaven and earth and brought me in visions of God to Jerusalem, to the entrance of the Pentecost gate that faces north. That was the sight of the infuriating image that provokes fury. And the presence of the God of Israel appeared there, like the vision that I had seen in the valley.
So, here it talks about the kavod Adonai, right? The kavod, this divine presence, the chariot, and he says it's like what I saw in the valley. So it says right here, the note's going to say, see chapter 1. Okay, so he says it was like that. What I saw, this entity that's made partly out of fire, it seems like it's partly out of fire, picked me up, took me up. I saw Jerusalem, and I saw God, or the kavod of God. I saw what is only described as what we can see of God, however you want to understand it. It's the same word that was used for the divine presence that the Israelites had in the desert, right? It was called the kavod. We don't really have a good translation for it, which is they translated as the capital P presence. The King James says the glory, right? A glory of God. There's not a good translation for it because we try our best to try to say what this could be called, but if it was my translation, I would put the word kavod. I don't know what I could try. I don't think an English word, as soon as I put the English word, I'm giving you my interpretation of what he saw. So,
Does the word kavanah come from that?
nope, but the word kavod is definitely connected to the word for heaviness, weight, something that's important. It's the word we use for honor, right? Kaved et avicha ve'et imecha, honor your father and mother. It's the same word, kavod. So it means something of honor or glory, which is why they translate it as glory. But clearly, that's not really, the translation of glory doesn't really give us any understanding that it's something of God. God's glory is much more ambiguous. When you say, well, that's God's glory. Well, are you talking about all the good things that God does? That's the glory of God. Or are you talking about no, this is God. There's some aspect of God here that you can see, which is what kavod seems to be. Some aspect of God that we can see. Is it a cloud? Is it a light? It's something that God manifests in this world. Okay? And again, he says, it's like what I saw in the valley, which there he described it as, as something that you could see, and he described it. So, he sees this, but this is now Jerusalem. He's not looking in his own area, his own backyard. He's now seeing Jerusalem. He sees a vision of Jerusalem. This is very important, and that's why I call today's class a vision of Jerusalem, because we're going to see a vision of Jerusalem at the end of the book of Ezekiel, which is one of the things that Ezekiel is most famous for. His vision of the chariot, and then this vision of Jerusalem that he has. Those are the things that he's the most famous for. But this one, he's not as famous for this vision of Jerusalem, but this is his first vision of Jerusalem. And it's important because if he already had a vision of Jerusalem, then, well, we should mention that, because when he has a further vision of Jerusalem, it at least was somewhat informed by this vision of Jerusalem, I think. So it's important to mention that there is a first vision of Jerusalem. So he sees Jerusalem, and he's seeing something there, we've already heard, that provokes fury. So it ain't good. What he's going to see here is not good. It says, provokes fury. It's not good. The translation here, provokes fury, could also be translated, Mary, as
Jealousy.
much better translation. And there's the example of the King James actually hitting it on the nail right there. The word kin'ah is the same word that when we read in the Ten Commandments that God is a jealous God. Kin'ah, el-kana. God is a jealous God. Meaning what God is seeing there is not something that should be there because it's not God. It's something that God is going to say, you're not worshiping me, and I'm jealous of that. That's what the Bible says frequently to describe God's feeling about us worshiping other gods. So we already kind of know what we're going to see here. Anybody else want to comment on what's happening here right now as Ezekiel's being lifted up and seen? Again, it says here he's flying, or at least he's feeling that he's flying. He's between heaven and earth as he's seeing this. So here's what he sees.
And I was told, O mortal, turn your eyes northward. I turned my eyes northward, and there, north of the gate of the altar, was that infuriating image on the approach. And God said to me, Mortal, do you see what they are doing, the terrible abominations that the house of Israel is practicing here, to drive me far from my sanctuary? You shall yet see even greater abominations.
Now,
This book says that an idol was placed in the entrance.
yes, well, it definitely seems to be an idol. The Bible does not describe it very well yet, at least what he's seen so far. Whatever it is, it's not good, and it's not God. And God is not happy with what's going on there. It must have been really bad, because they won't even describe it. When they say that it's an abomination, a big abomination, terrible abomination, whatever, however the translation is, a toevot, it's a really bad thing. Yeah, it's the same word that's used for that. We have the same words used when the Maccabees describe whatever idol was in the Greeks put in during the time of the Maccabees. Whatever that idol was also called an abomination, which we're not really sure what it was. There's speculation that it was a statue of Zeus or a statue of Apollo, or some people said it was a pig that was brought in. Different interpretations on what that might be, but it's partly because it doesn't say. The Maccabees don't really they don't specify what it is that was this big problem that they brought in. It clearly was a problem, and it clearly was meant to defile the temple, and it's why they had to rededicate the temple, why they had to cleanse it out. But here it is right here during the time, 500 years earlier than the Maccabees, about 500 years earlier, this is what's going on. So, this is bad. This is bad. But he says, you're going to see even worse. You're going to see even greater abominations. I'm not sure that it... What does the King James say about you shall see even greater abominations? What does it say? That's the same?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, here we go.
Then God brought me to the entrance of the court, and I looked, and there was a hole in the wall. I was told, mortal, break through the wall. So I broke through the wall and found an entrance. And I was told, enter and see the vile abominations that they are practicing here.
And that's the same thing there. Toevot, haraot, the really bad, evil abominations that they're doing. Wow. You want to see what's happening, don't you?
I entered and looked, and there all detestable forms of creeping things and beasts and all the fetishes of the house of Israel were depicted over the entire wall. Before them stood 70 of the elders of the house of Israel, with Jaazaniah the son of Shaphan standing in their midst. Everyone had a censer in his hand, and a thick cloud of incense smoke ascended. Again, God spoke to me. O mortal, have you seen what the elders of the house of Israel are doing in the darkness? Every one in his image-covered chamber? For they say, God does not see us. God has abandoned the country. It's almost like a sermon.
They don't see it. No one will know. God won't know. Nobody. God doesn't even care, though. Here's the interesting thing. God doesn't care. God's already gone.
Wasn't 70 the number of the Sanhedrin?
Well, yeah, but even here,
Just a mystic number.
this is the 70 elders, which we have even earlier, right? In the book of Numbers, we have 70 elders that are representing, again, you know, the people. Again, whether it's 70 or 72, 6 times, you know, look, 6 times 12 would be 72, which would be half a dozen for each of the 12 tribes. There's a tradition that the Septuagint, that's what the word Septuagint means, that the 70 elders who translated the Bible into Greek, right? That they translated it for King Ptolemy of Egypt, the Greek king, the ancestor of Cleopatra. The Jews were hired to translate for the king the Bible, the Hebrew Bible. And according to this famous text, the letter of Aristeas, The scribes were all locked up separately. All 72 of them were locked up separately. And they came back with the exact same translation in Greek. Every one of them. Every word was the same, which is impossible. But because of that, people said that the Septuagint was a miracle. They literally felt, the Jews of the time, taught that the Septuagint was a miraculous translation and therefore was a holy translation that could be used. It was their justification for using the Septuagint as their primary text. It gave them the ability to say, our Bible is given by God too, because only a miracle could have given this ability for these translators to all translate it exactly the same. It's God's work. So it allowed people to read the Septuagint and feel like they're reading the Word of God in the original. We don't even bother saying, we would never say that. We would never say our translation is the best translation, or is a holy translation, or is the best way to understand it. That's weird. But anyways,
We don't, but the Catholics do.
there's an idea that, again, that divine favor or divine power made this translation, in which case you can take it and know that it's exactly what God wants you to say. You don't need to read any other commentary. You don't need to read any other translation. You don't need to read the original, because this one's good enough. That's what it's saying. Anyways, so the elders are all doing bad stuff. The priest is doing bad stuff. Everyone is doing bad stuff. And what do they see? Their images of these gods are all over their chambers. All of the chambers are covered with these deities, these gods. And part of it, though, does seem because they don't think God is there anymore. So they're like, what difference does it make? God's not here anymore. Yep.
And God said to me, you shall see even more terrible abominations that they practice.
So it's getting to get worse, according to Ezekiel. He's got one more thing he's got to show him. Now this one's an interesting one. So let's take a little look at what happens here. A little looky at what's going on in Jerusalem.
Next, God brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the house of God, and there sat the women, bewailing Tammuz. I was told, have you seen, mortal? You shall see even more terrible abominations than these.
Okay, so let's just take a look here at what's going on. So if you look at the note here in our commentary, in our translation, the JPS, it just says a Babylonian god. Well, that doesn't help us a whole lot. We know that Tammuz was really, really, really important to the ancient Middle East. He was one of the primary gods. Rosemary, you know a lot about gods. What do you know about the god Tammuz?
Not much, no. Sorry.
Okay, well, I'm going to show you a little bit about Tammuz. I'm even going to show you some pictures of Tammuz, because Tammuz was, we still have a little bit of Tammuz around. So that's what I'm going to tell you.
Your people,
Who? What people?
vegetarian.
Why? Why is he God of the vegetarians?
I don't know. I'm just
No.
believing.
No. You'll see Tammuz right here. So in Akkadian, the language of Sumeria in that area, or in that Sumerian and then Akkadian, he was called Dumuz. The Canaanites had a name for him, Adon. And then because the Canaanites and the Phoenicians were really good at spreading their religion around, or their text around, Adon, also known as Adonis. So whenever you hear that word Adonis, right, that we say that person's an Adonis, right? He's this beautiful man, right?
Okay,
And
Adonis I could tell you about.
Adonis was a mortal lover, it says, of Aphrodite and Persephone. So we have this idea, and again, the word Adon in Hebrew, like Adonai, means Lord. It means, it's a Phoenician word. It's a Hebrew word, right? So the myth goes Adonis was gored by a wild boar, right, and died in Aphrodite's arms. As she wept, his blood mingled with her tears and became the anemone flower, which, again, the plants would sprout but soon wither and die. And the woman would mourn the death of Adonis. Interesting. Didn't it just say that Tammuz was being wept for? Right? So we know that those traditions continued. So we would see there's pictures of Adonis being held by Aphrodite. But what we know about him, he's referred to in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is one of the oldest things we have written. The cult of Ishtar, right? Here's what, again, he was worshipped with his consort Ishtar, god of milk and shepherds, right? So this is an interesting thing. And this is actually was one of my teachers for the brief time I studied Akkadian at Oxford. He was one of my teachers. Complex and bewildering, to say the least. We still are trying to figure out or reconstruct exactly what happened because there seems to be a lot of worship of him, and we're just trying to kind of figure it out. Still by some of the things we have. So here he says some scholars have based on references to the Hebrew Bible that there was some continuation of this practice of planting things for him, especially things that would die. Here's an interesting thing about him, of course. It says that there was a marriage that they would reenact of Tammuz being married, and that would be the spring. That would be the beginning of spring. There's a lot of stuff here, but I will show you one really important thing about Tammuz. That his marriage to Inanna or Ishtar is the beginning of spring. There's also a really important thing about him, which is that according to the early versions of this myth, it says, why does he die? Well, different reasons, but one of them is he failed to properly mourn her death. And when she returns from the underworld, she allows demons, Gala demons, to drag him down to the underworld as her replacement. Inanna later regrets the decision and decrees Tammuz will spend half the year in the underworld and the other half with her. Sounds a lot about like the Persephone myth, right? The origin of why there's a springtime. What people thought was really interesting about this was his resurrection. And his resurrection at springtime. You can understand where I'm going with this, right? This is the one reason why I said I wanted to have Glory here today. Because this is part of what we have in the mythology, and definitely the one of the most preeminent visions, and then later on imagery, is this. The women weeping for Jesus. Here's one of the famous ones. Here's another one of the famous ones, because this one's on the Sistine Chapel. The women weeping for Jesus. So, this ritual of worshiping a God who is killed, resurrected, and part of the ritual is weeping for them. It's right here. To just say it's a Babylonian god and be done with it doesn't really give you the backstory of what's happening, which is that this ritual of women weeping for Tammuz continued on in different ways for a very, very long time, in different ways. Now, it doesn't mean that Christianity, just took this story and embellished it, but the idea that these images and that these traditions were already there, we have to recognize. The cult of Tammuz was very, very important in the Middle East, and it spread, as you heard, with Adonis throughout Europe. There were a lot of religions that were spread by Greeks and Romans around the world that were not originally Greek and Roman religions. Adonis is one of the more famous ones because the name Adonis is Adon. It actually is the same God. But there were other examples of that, of the Greeks and Romans taking religions from other places, especially the Near East, and bringing them back. Why? Because they were known to be older religions. And so people looked at them and going, oh, that's a really ancient religion. People have been keeping that religion for a long time. It's one of the things that made Judaism attractive for Romans during the period after Augustus Caesar. It's why some people were attracted to Judaism. We have records of it, so I'm not telling you something that we didn't already. We know this. We know it from the Romans, and we know it from the Jewish sources that Romans were attracted to Judaism. But they were also attracted to the worship of Semiramis, and they were attracted to the worship of Isis, and they were very attracted to the religion of Mithra, who was so popular that the Romans spread that religion everywhere where they went. And that was a Persian religion. That wasn't a Greco-Roman religion. That was a religion they picked up from Persia, which, by the way, the Mithra's birthday is December 25th. So these religions didn't go away. They just got readapted, and we found ways to incorporate some of their things in there. Look, the Jewish people have not forgotten Tammuz either. It's the month of July, June and July. Look on the Hebrew calendar. Tammuz is the month right before Av. It goes Tammuz, Av, right? Elul, and then Tishrei, which we're in right now. Just a couple months ago was the month of Tammuz. We don't talk about it. We don't go, hey, by the way, Tammuz is the name of a Babylonian god, but it is. But then again, so is Janus, in January, that we're going to come up to, and so is, so are
March is for
so is Mars, March, the god of war. So we have these vestiges there, and needless to say, today being homage to the god Tuus, they're there, but we just don't talk about him anymore. But this is the god Tammuz, and it's very clear what the women do. They cry for him, and that's part of their worship. And God is not happy with it. They're not supposed to be doing this. And they're doing it right in Jerusalem, right in the heart of Jerusalem, right at the temple in Jerusalem. So this is bad stuff. What else is going on here in the temple?
Then God brought me into the inner court of the house of God, and there, at the entrance to the temple of God, between the portico and the altar, were about 25 men, their backs to the temple of God and their faces to the east. They were bowing low to the sun in the east.
Yeah, their backs were to God, and they were worshiping Shamash. They were worshiping
The sun.
right there, the sun. They were worshiping the God of the sun, the personification of the sun. By the way, just so you know, the word Shamash, that's a god. The Babylonians called their god of the sun Shamash. He was their god. There is no other word for sun in Hebrew. It's the sun god. It's just, like, we don't think about it, but that's the actual name of the god, Shamash. He was the god. So, people are worshiping him, and they're turning their back on God. They're worshiping away from the Holy of Holies towards the sun. So it says right there, their faces were to God, to the sun, and their backs were to the temple. That's about as disrespectful to God as you can possibly get. They're showing their butts to God. They're showing their face to Shamash in Jerusalem, in front of the temple, right in front of the temple. By the way, this is the interesting argument that has often been made about, and I'm not saying it to be political, and I don't want anyone to say, like, I'm making fun of this, but it has been said many times, and it is a fact, that Muslims, you'll hear, they'll say that Jerusalem is the third holiest city for Islam after Mecca and Medina. But the reality is that Muslims pray towards Mecca and Medina. right? Well, guess what? In Jerusalem, when they're in Jerusalem, they don't pray towards Jerusalem. They pray towards Mecca and Medina when they're in Jerusalem. So the point was made by people, sometimes, again, for political reasons, and I'm not saying I'm doing this for I'm not saying it for political reasons, but the reality is that people who are praying on the Temple Mount to this day, who are praying, for example, at the Dome of the Rock or at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, are not praying towards Jerusalem. They're not praying towards that temple. They're praying towards Mecca. They're praying towards Mecca. They're praying towards the east, facing Mecca. They're not facing Jerusalem. So if Jerusalem, again, if the Bible is telling us that at least some of what matters is the way we're facing, we face towards Jerusalem wherever we are, even when we're in Jerusalem. And there's discussions about that in the Talmud, that if you are in Jerusalem, you pray towards the wall. And if you're at the wall, you pray towards the Holy of Holies. So you always are trying to pray towards that place. Your face is praying towards the Holy of Holies. You're not supposed to be doing what these people are doing, and you're not supposed to be doing when anyone ever turns their back on the Holy of Holies, they're disrespecting it. I'm not saying, that's a reason to drive the Muslims out of Jerusalem. I am telling you that you can't have it both ways. You can't say, well, it's holy to us too. It's not as holy as the place that you're praying towards. And that's the argument that's made even today to some extent. That's all I'm telling you. All right, let's continue with what Ezekiel is seeing here.
And I was told, do you see, O mortal? Is it not enough for the house of Judah to practice the abominations that they have committed here, that they must fill the country with lawlessness and provoke me still further and thrust the branch to their nostrils? I in turn will act with fury. I will show no pity or compassion. Though they cry aloud to me, I will not listen to them.
Yep. So, I'm done with them, right? So, when they do cry to me, right? You see, he says, look what's happening in my house, right? Look what's happening in my city. Look at what's happening here.
What's with the branch?
Oh yeah, it's an interesting phrase. Let's see if there's any good commentary on what why it says branch.
That had a footnote.
Let me just see if there's any. No. Let me see.
It's got a J.
No.
What's
Yeah, let's
the
see.
J?
Goad me to fury. So when you put a branch underneath someone's nostril, it's like you're teasing them. Oh, I guess they mean like a bull. Like if you're playing around with a bull and here, let's just see what it says here. No, that's even being translated even differently, which is, he's saying that this Rashi piece is saying that the branch is the offerings that they're making with they're upsetting God's nose with the offerings to the other gods, the censers, the spices that they're doing. That's what the use of nose is there. We're not done though, really, with the prophecy. So it's not done.
That God called loudly in my hearing, saying, "Approach, you who are in charge of this city, each bearing his weapons of destruction." And 6 figures entered by way of the upper gate that faces north, each with his club in his hand, and among them was another one, clothed in linen, with a writing case at his waist. They came forward and stopped at the bronze altar. Now the presence of the God of Israel had moved from the cherub on which it had rested to the platform of the house. The figure clothed in linen, with a writing case at his waist, was summoned.
This is pretty wild stuff. And again, it's another example of kind of an area where people don't even want to really deal with it too much. Let me just see if there's any interesting Rashi that we can show you. So, nah, it doesn't really help us. It just basically says God's getting off of the cherub. And God is speaking to some other divine figure, right? One that is taking notes. Again, this is quite a vision, because here it's pretty clear that there's a God, a presence of God is speaking, it's moving, it's got up off of the seat and is now talking to some other angelic, divine type entity, and has a writing case, right? And here's what it says.
Wait.
Yeah,
You said divine entity?
yeah.
Look like soldiers to me.
Well, those do. The ones that have the six figures, each with a club in his hand, definitely one. But then there was another one, right?
Okay.
Clothed in a linen with a writing case at his waist. So he's there to take notes. He's there to write down what's happening, right? So this is God's scribe, if you will, right? And it tells us a little bit about what scribes did, which is they had writing case. So they didn't just have a pen, they had a whole writing case, which makes sense, right? So he's wearing linen, by the way, too, which is almost as if to say he's not going to get messy, because he doesn't have a club. He's not there is a, doesn't say too much
He's not
about.
wearing armor like a soldier would.
Yeah, he's wearing linen, and that is supposed to be like, well, he's not there to
He's
fight.
kind of dressed up.
He's not there to fight. Yep.
It says here, according to Rashi, when the Shekinah leaves the temple,
Yeah.
it can then be destroyed.
Well, let's see. Let's see where he gets that from. So getting up means, to some extent, that something can happen. Okay. Well, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens.
And God said to him, pass through the city, through Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the persons who moan and groan because of all the abominations that are committed in it.
Yeah, and moaning and groaning seems to be here to be not in pain. Well, let's see what happens.
The others were told in my hearing,
Yeah.
follow him through the city and strike. Show no pity or compassion. Kill off the graybeard, youth and maiden, women and children, but do not touch any person who bears the mark. Begin here at my sanctuary. So they began with the elders who were in front of the house.
So,
So this is like Passover.
yeah, very much so. Except in this case, the people are marked. The people actually have a mark on their forehead. Now, if this sounds a little bit like,
Ash Wednesday.
yeah, it does sound a lot like Ash Wednesday. Because again, the mark is going to spare them. That mark is going to allow them to, these are people who are not, these are the good people. These are the people who are not,
These are the people who are moaning and groaning because all these bad things are happening.
yeah, they are,
Happy with it.
they're not happy with it. They're not happy with what's happening. So those are the good people. The other people are all going to get killed. So pretty much the people who are going to get hammered are the everyone else, right? So the assumption is that like a lot of people are going to get it. Now, it does seem to indicate that like the good people are going to be spared, which
Which is not what like Jeremiah was saying.
exactly. So Rosemary is pointing out that this is like a Passover and that there are people who are going to get passed over. This is already a huge, like, good, like a blessing, because it doesn't seem like the good people are going to be spared. But yeah, these are people who are getting some kind of divine mark. We don't know that they know that they're getting this divine mark, because if this is an angelic entity that is marking the people, they may not know that they have that mark. It's written in invisible ink, or not visible ink. Let's put it that way, not visible ink. But whatever the marking is, God sees it, or again, the destruction's going to see it. this is a very weird scene, folks. I mean, this is, like, most people don't really know what to do with this scene, and they don't comment on it that much because this is not typical of the prophets. It's not typical of most of the stuff that we see in the Bible. Really only until you get into the book of Daniel do you see these kind of things happening. This is not the way God normally operates, though, we saw God destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. It's not like God isn't capable of picking people out to destroy, but this is, first of all, happening to us, and it's happening in Jerusalem, and these are clearly angelic beings, which we don't really have much description of angels in the Bible. We really don't. They appear like humans. We don't know we really don't know how they operate. But these definitely seem like angelic entities.
Disordered?
What? Yeah. Yeah, the ones with
I
clubs.
was gonna say, you got 6 of them, and they're gonna kill a whole city.
Well, they're not normal. They're not normal. They're not people.
They're Terminators.
Yeah, you cannot negotiate with them. They will not stop until you are dead. No, that's what he says. That's what he says. He's there. He's the
but
Terminator.
That's interesting, because if you go back to the first sentence, right? You men in charge of the city, each bearing his weapons of destruction.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
6 men entered by the way of the upper gate that faces the north, and apparently the Babylonians enter from the north too.
Yes. So yes. The reason that the commentary says that is because this is what's going to happen when the Babylonians come in. So essentially, the Babylonians are being led by these angelic entities.
So they're giving them a roadmap.
Yeah, they're literally doing. What they're doing is following these angelic beings. And again, don't kill anybody who has the mark.
And God said to them, defile the house and fill the courts with the slain, then go forth. So they went forth and began to kill in the city. When they were out killing and I remained alone, I flung myself on my face and cried out, oh, my sovereign God, are you going to annihilate all that is left of Israel, pouring out your fury upon Jerusalem? The answer came. The iniquity of the houses of Judah and Israel is very, very great. The land is full of crime and the city is full of corruption. For they say, God has forsaken the land and God does not see. I in turn will show no pity or compassion. I will give them their deserts. And then the one clothed in linen with a writing case at his waist brought back word saying, I have done as you commanded me.
So, it's been written. Right? I wrote it down. I wrote down what you told me to do, what's going to happen. This is the prophecy. This is the vision of the destruction of Jerusalem. It hasn't happened yet, but this is what's going to happen. That's why the commentary you had is there. This is the way death and destruction is going to come in. But if you want to know why we could even attempt to have this image of a book of life and a book of death, you just read it. Perfect timing, folks. So we get the final seal. This guy in the angelic role that he has, this writing in the book, writes it down, and it's done. This is what Ezekiel sees. Ezekiel sees essentially, the book being sealed for the people of Jerusalem. So it's very timely to read this right now. This is not, that we don't really have, again, in the book of Daniel, which is very, very late, that's, like 500 years after this is where we the only other place we get anything like this. These kind of visions. It's the only, I know I'm kind of going on about that, but this is not normal. This is not the normal thing these are not the normal things that the prophets see. This is not the normal language that we have. This is not the norm for what the Bible recounts. no, and it's not. I mean, there's no evidence that it was. There's no reason to believe that it wasn't. That's why when we get, or when we talk about what's in the book of Daniel, or what's in the, even for the Christians, the book of Revelations, it means that they're drawing on sources essentially really from Ezekiel. I want to make this clear. There could have been a lot of other writings like this. I'm not saying that there weren't. I'm not saying this was just like totally off the wall, whatever. We don't have them though. We don't have those texts. This is the only one we have. There's a very good possibility there were others like this, but we don't have them. This we've had for 2,700 years. Okay, so, or 2,600 years. I mean, this is, all I can tell you is, this is what we have. All right, let's continue with his, yeah.
One question. In my notes here, it says, unlike most prophets who emphasize repentance, the theology of Ezekiel is that the people's sin is so great that repentance at this point is impossible.
It's impossible, yeah. That's,
Alteration of Jeremiah's mission. The purpose of Ezekiel's prophecy is thus to explain the disaster. And I think disaster is a poor choice of a word, because this is premeditated, right? I'm not going to say it on
yeah, so,
video here, not to try to avert it. His job was to explain it.
yeah. So that's the theological difference, or and again, what the difference is, and this is the beginning of it, but we're going to see it the rest of the next 10 chapters, is this idea. I mean, they're kind of explaining what we're going to see the rest of it, which is Ezekiel is telling people, yeah, there's nothing you can do anymore. Jeremiah is already doing a little bit of that, which Jeremiah is kind of saying, you know, there's no way to repent, or there's nothing we can do to change. That's what we talked about with Jonah, about renouncing that this is now recorded. So if this is recorded, you know, that's where we'd get, well, it's been done. It's already, there's no changing it now. But I don't know. I mean, remember, Ezekiel's already in exile, so he's also speaking to people. Look, in many chapters, well, not many chapters, but in about 20 chapters, we actually meet a guy who escapes the destruction. But like, we forget that Ezekiel was already exiled, right? And he's just waiting for the other shoe to drop back in Jerusalem. He's already, like, for him, he's already exiled. He's already out. His world's already upended. But he's now telling people it's going to be upended for everybody.
Did the prophets ever overlap?
Yeah, he overlapped with Jeremiah. So he's talking about this stuff, and Jeremiah's talking about this stuff. Jeremiah's also pretty much telling people it's too late too. I only disagree with that commentary about one thing, which is that I don't think, there are parts of Jeremiah where he's more hopeful, but he's being hopeful, I think, for way in the future. I don't think he's being hopeful for them. I think Jeremiah also, I'm not alone in that, by basically saying there's really nothing you can do anymore. Just put your head down and just deal with it. So I think that's the only thing you could say is that Jeremiah is speaking to people in Jerusalem, where he's talking to people who are already outside of Jerusalem.
Where's the compassion?
There's nothing, at this stage, there's, I don't know. I mean, the best thing is you got a mark on your head and you don't get killed. I mean, that's the best. The best thing is you're going to be a survivor. I mean, what would a Jew who's telling this community in 1941 in Europe, you know, forget Europe, I mean Poland, like, what are you going to tell people? For the next 3 or 4 years, we're all going to die.
But I understand the removal, right, in the most extreme measures of the 70 elders, right, because they were in charge of the Torah, right? They were in charge of, you know, but I don't understand the...
Men, women, and children?
I don't understand that because I'm going to just place myself back 2,700 years, 3,000 years. Come on, you know, they were just tilling the land and herding the goats and living their life, and their life expectancy was what, 40, 50? So that I need, I don't think I'll get it, right, but I need more explanation on that, because I understand, right, so if your leaders are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, I understand their removal, right? But to condemn an entire a city, especially a sacred place, doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and
There's
so.
a lot of places where there's communal punishment, though.
Yeah, in the Bible, there is. It's all communal. It's all really, well, most of it is. At least the important stuff is communal punishment.
And here it says, a few will survive, but they will have lost their holy city. That
Yeah.
doesn't sound really good.
Well, if God is going to destroy even His own place, He's basically saying, "I can't fix it. I'm willing to let it be gone," which is why the commentary says, getting up off of His throne means that God's letting this stuff happen. So God getting off the throne means now that God's not on the throne anymore, Jerusalem can be destroyed.
You know, I can understand the mark, right, because those people were faithful, even though their leaders weren't doing what they were supposed to do. I get that, I understand that. So I mean, to a certain extent, I guess, I can see through it. You have a handful, I don't know how many people, right, that
But even the people going about their daily business, they were going about their daily business worshiping idols.
But the problem, but the problem we have is that, do those people that with the mark, are those people really going to be spared? Because it doesn't seem like anyone's going to be spared. It doesn't sound like, well, there's not a rhyme or reason for somebody being spared. Like the person who gets spared, their house just happened to collapse and people thought they were dead and they run back out. I mean, it's going to be a fluke if people survive. That's the problem.
But in answer to Rosemary, right, my counter argument would be, those folks didn't make unilateral decisions, right? I'm not giving them as much credit as you are, right? Back then, like I said, I think people were just kind of, not drones, it's not the right word, right? But they were just going about their lives. And so if the leadership wasn't doing their job, right? I understand their removal when you get good leadership in, and then hopefully that changes.
Well, it definitely helps. But if we're going to be, I would just say, if we're going to be held responsible for our leadership right now, we are doomed. No, it's serious. I don't want to be held responsible. I don't want to be held accountable for those people.
Am I responsible for Marjorie Taylor Greene?
Our time is much different, 3,000 years.
I guess.
Technological
But to use the
individual thought.
Yeah, but to use the example, if we're going to be held accountable for our leadership, then we're doomed. We're doomed. Because our leaders are not where we're at right now. I think most people would agree. They're not the best reflection of us.
Then I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to say that. Well, then maybe you're right. History will repeat itself even 3,000 years later. But we're talking about then. That's all I'm saying. So this is God that created the earth.
Yeah.
The compassionate, all-knowing, all-being, right? And now, after these couple prophets, you're coming and saying, okay, let's do an extreme measure here, right? Listen, I don't want to.
No, but it's a good point. But it also then begs the question: what kind of leaders are you going to put in charge of your community? And so look, the people. You're right. The leadership is important, but we've already seen that the people can depose their leaders. Remember when we read about Jeremiah talking, he was sitting there with Zedekiah, and he was telling Zedekiah, you're not supposed to, God doesn't want you to fight the Babylonians. You can't win. You think you can be allies with Egypt and with Assyria, that they're doomed. You're doomed for talking with them. Just deal with the Babylonians, do what they tell you. And Zedekiah tells Jeremiah, I don't have any power. You remember that? I can't stop these people. They'll do what they want to do, and they'll kill me. And so he basically, as you said, he's a weak leader. But the problem is that's what the people wanted. And then the people killed Gedaliah because that's what they wanted. And so Jeremiah was sitting there the whole time going, so yeah, the people were weaker then. They didn't have as much power, but they had power. They they had at least enough power to depose leaders that they didn't like. Somebody had the power to do that. There was some level of middle leadership that got rid of these people, because we saw there were 4 kings in that period of time. So however much power the kings had, somebody else had a lot of power below them. And there was either a popular whatever, the popular sentiment or whatever, but something happened. And that's why we weren't supposed to have kings anyways. I mean, that's why the Bible says, look, you're going to have a king, but you're doing it because everyone else has a king. And after they come back from Babylonia, they don't ever have a king until the Maccabees. And that turns out to be a disaster. So having a king for us as Jews doesn't work out. And that's why whenever anybody gets too much power, we make fun of them by calling them a king. That's why Netanyahu now is, when they make fun of him, his opponents call him King Bibi, right? So they call him Melech Bibi. They make fun of him by saying he's a king. And that's what they did with Ben Gurion. They do that with any leader who has too much power or they can't seem to get rid of.
Those are elected leaders.
Correct.
They weren't elected, right? It was bloodlines, right?
Correct, when they were kings, when they were kings. But that time when they were not having kings, or again, however the image is, there is this understanding that if you had a situation where you could have a meritocracy of leadership, that would be healthier, right? Where the people who deserved to be leaders were leaders, good leaders. Look, I mean, we don't know what the leaders were during the Persian period, from about 400 to about 150. We don't know what the leaders were like in Israel, but we just know there was a lot of peace and people didn't do bad things, or at least not on a massive scale, and things seemed to be pretty good. That was after the Persians let us come back. And it worked.
Which we're going to be getting to.
Yeah, but we don't really know much about that period. The Bible doesn't cover that period. The Bible has closed the book on that. We don't know. The sources on that are so limited. Josephus writes a little bit about it. There's some in some of the Greek and some of the Roman sources. They're very limited. It's very limited as far as what we know about that period. But it seems to be very peaceful. So there was a time when we had pretty good leaders. And we had, look, I mean, for whatever you want to say about it, the Davidic dynasty lasted for 500 years, 450 years or so. That's pretty stable. I mean, that's for even Egyptian stuff, or
And that's what we're talking about, right?
good. Yeah, it's coming to the end.
That's my point. So the people didn't have, I don't want to belabor these.
No. But whatever, however the balance went, it was going okay. You can make the argument that once the Assyrians and then the Babylonians get on the scene, things get really bad. I don't hear anybody making that argument, though I could, and like what, it has no value to make that argument. But if it wasn't for the outside forces, could these people have figured it out? Could they have done the right thing? Maybe. If it wasn't for this stuff, maybe they could have figured it out. Maybe they wouldn't have. Maybe the Davidic line never would have ended. But what would we be today? I mean, what would the Jewish people be? To some extent, we didn't become a people until we went into exile, until Ezekiel, until there's a person that's telling us, you're going to be okay in exile. It's going to be hard, and it's going to be really bad to see Jerusalem be destroyed, but we're going to get to it. It's at the end of Ezekiel. It's at the end of Ezekiel. During this period,
Yeah.
70 years. 70. From the destruction till the time when the Jews are able to come back. 70 years.
So the picture is you have a group of people, 5,000, 10,000, whatever it is. They're leaving, and I'm just trying to picture this, and you got a city burning. Mm-hmm. If there was stuff.
Yeah, but remember, there was like 3 or 4 exiles, right? The exile that took Ezekiel, there were other exiles. We read about it, Jeconiah, the exile, all those other exiles before it's, the destruction. So there was some waves of, we read about them in Jeremiah. So yes, how many thousands of people? In the 25,000 range, minimum.
But there was no physical destruction, it was just burning.
Who?
Because they were bricks, so we really thatched the roofs maybe, right?
Yeah, but the temple was destroyed. The city of Jerusalem, whatever was there, was destroyed.
Moving on, sorry.
No, that's important. Now let's finish up chapter 10. We're going to read some of this because this is also still part of this vision. And it reminds us again, this little section here, about the throne that we read about, the Merkavah that we read about in chapter 1. We read this.
I looked, and on the expanse, over the heads of the cherubs, there was something like a sapphire stone. An appearance resembling a throne could be seen over them.
Yeah, this is what we read about in chapter 1.
God spoke to the figure clothed in linen and said, "Step inside the wheelwork under the cherubs and fill your hands with glowing coals from among the cherubs and scatter them over the city." And he went in as I looked on.
Yeah, that's not going to be good.
Now the cherubs were standing on the south side of the house when that figure entered, and the cloud filled the inner court. But when the presence of God moved from the cherubs to the platform of the house was filled with a cloud, and the court was filled with the radiance of the presence of God. The sound of the cherubs' wings could be heard as far as the outer court, like the voice of El Shaddai when speaking.
Well, wait, let's just look at that note, which says, again, what's that? In Genesis chapter 17, God is called El Shaddai, right? That's one of the names for God. Reminds us of, again, kind of like what happens at Mount Sinai.
When God commanded the figure clothed in linen, "Take fire from among the cherubs within the wheelwork," he went in and stood beside a wheel. And a cherub stretched out a hand among the cherubs to the fire that was among the cherubs. He took some and put it into the hands of the one clothed in linen, who took it and went out. The cherubs appeared to have the form of a human hand under their wings. I could see that there were 4 wheels beside the cherubs, 1 wheel beside each of the cherubs. As for the appearance of the wheels, they gleamed like the beryl stone. In appearance, the 4 had the same form, as if there were 2 wheels cutting through each other.
Yeah, this is a little difficult to imagine. Yes, there's John. John went and got the wheels again. So this is,
I like
So-
picture books.
so again, for people who can't see, here, I'll bring it over a little bit. So we have,
I keep thinking that it's a bit like a bit of, swivel luggage.
so let me hold that up so you can see the wheels down there at the bottom. So as Sarah depicted these wheels, they are wheels that kind of are within the wheels, right? And so she has them kind of like rotating inside of each other. Some people have described this as, again, that the wheels can go in any direction. And the only way they can go in any direction is if they can swivel or if they can move. Again, other people have said, sounds a little bit like the only way people could describe some type of VTOL type engine that can move and swivel and go off in different directions. And there definitely is some type of fire here. So the wheels have some type of fire either near them or not far away from them, because it just said, well, first of all, it's described as their beryl stone.
2 chapters, we're reading the word appearance.
Yes.
A lot.
Well, if you saw a steam-powered chariot and you'd never seen one, what would you make of it?
Yeah, and so that's why, again, people say, well, he can't really describe it because he's never seen anything like it. And so if this is something like a spaceship or some type of flying thing, which it definitely seems to be flying, that's the only way he could describe it.
Well, we know the pyramids were built from people from outer space.
I don't know, but this is a description of something that he can't even describe. That's the point, what you're saying.
Fire could be a form of propulsion.
Yes, well, it's definitely by the wheels. So what happens here?
And when they moved, each could move in the direction of any of its 4 quarters. They did not veer as they moved. The cherubs moved in the direction in which one of the heads faced, without turning as they moved. Their entire bodies, backs, hands, and wings, and the wheels of the 4 of them, were covered all over with eyes.
Now that's a difficult thing to depict, and Sarah doesn't really have that on there, and we really don't know how to make sense of that. But
You know what it sounds like? The
What?
Abrams tank.
why?
Because those things can move in all kinds of ways, and the turrets can move wherever
That's true.
It's looking-
That's true. The
Same with Apache helicopter.
And if it had like electric lights on it, that could look like
look
eyes.
like a lot of eyes, right? So it's very possible, again, that, he's describing things he's never seen. He can't really put them into words. But he definitely he sees the movement of this being primarily, again, something that he can't describe. He can't describe the way these things move. But they definitely are covered with eyes, which again, could be lights, could be seen as lights, could be seen as eyes are also cameras, but again, would he have seen those as eyes? We don't really know. But keep going.
It was these wheels that I had heard called the wheelwork. Each one had 4 faces. One was a cherub's face, the second a human face, the third a lion's face, and the fourth an eagle's face.
So again, this seems to be a little different than the
Yeah, we're missing the ox.
than the
We have a
description,
cherub
because
instead.
now a cherub has taken the place, and it
Can
seems.
I see Sarah's work? Can you put it in front of the camera?
Yeah, yeah, but you're not going to be able to see in her picture. She has the cherub. Well, she doesn't have the cherub. The cherubs are the entities there that are not that
Yeah.
have all the things on it. But here it
Yeah.
actually says that it has a cherub's face. So a human face is different than the cherub's face, the
Yeah.
lion's face, the eagle's face. So one of them took the place of the bull. So,
I see.
but it says right here. Keep going. Yep.
The cherubs ascended. Those were the creatures that I had seen by the Chabar Canal. Whenever the cherubs went, the wheels went beside them. And when the cherubs lifted their wings to ascend from the earth, the wheels did not roll away from their side. When those stood still, these stood still. And when those ascended, these ascended with them, for the spirit of the creature was in them. Then the presence of God left the platform of the house and stopped above the cherubs. And I saw the cherubs lift their wings and rise from the earth with the wheels beside them as they departed. And they stopped at the entrance of the eastern gate of the house of God, with the presence of the God of Israel above them. They were the same creatures that I had seen below the God of Israel at the Chabar Canal. So now I knew that they were cherubs.
Yeah, he said that a few times. He's pretty sure that, again, what he's seen is what he saw then.
Each one had 4 faces, and each had 4 wings, with the form of human hands under the wings. As for the form of their faces, they were the very faces that I had seen by the Chabar Canal, their appearance and their features, and each could move in the direction of any of its faces.
Yeah. Now, we're going to read a little bit more because it's kind of the middle of the idea still. And let me just put this down for a second. The point that, again, somebody already made, I forget who made it, or I think Sheldon was reading his commentary, that when God gets off of the throne, that allows for the temple to be the holy temple to be destroyed, right? If God gets off the throne, then there's nothing protecting it anymore. God's not going to let himself get destroyed, so him not being there anymore allows for that to happen. So let's read a little bit more.
Then a spirit lifted me up and brought me to the east gate of the house of God, which faces eastward, and there at the entrance of the gate were 25 men, among whom I saw Yaazaniah son of Azor and Pelatiah son of Benaiah, leaders of the people. God said to me, O mortal, these are the men who plan iniquity and plot wickedness in this city, who say, there is no need now to build houses. This city is the pot, and we are the meat.
So again, if you want to look at the note, he's saying, or this commentary is saying that he's referring to the fact that there's nobody coming back.
I adjure you, prophesy against them. Prophesy, O mortal. Thereupon the Spirit of God fell upon me, and I was told, speak, thus said God, such are your thoughts, O house of Israel. I know what comes into your mind. Many have you slain in this city. You have filled its streets with corpses. Assuredly, thus said the sovereign God, the corpses that you have piled up in it are the meat for which it is the pot, but you shall be taken out of it. You feared the sword, and the sword I will bring upon you, declares the sovereign God.
Yeah, so he's telling him, no, you're meat in the sense that you're dead meat. And that's exactly what he's telling him. You think that you guys are now in charge because you get to have some fun now? So again, the problem is some of the leadership had already been exiled, and these people are being left in charge, and you think this is good? No. You guys are the ones who are going to be killed.
I will take you out of it and deliver you into the hands of strangers, and I will execute judgments upon you. You shall fall by the sword. I will punish you at the border of Israel, and you shall know that I am God. This city shall not be a pot for you, nor you the meat in it. I will punish you at the border of Israel. Then you shall know that I am God, whose laws you did not follow and whose rules you did not obey, acting instead according to the rules of the nations around you.
Now watch what happens.
Now, as I prophesied, Pelatiah, son of Benaiah, dropped dead. I threw myself upon my face and cried out aloud, Ah, my sovereign God, you are wiping out the remnant of Israel. Then the word of God came to me. O mortal, I will save your kinsfolk, your relatives, your next of kin, all of that very house of Israel, to whom the inhabitants of Jerusalem say, Keep far from God, the land has been given as a heritage to us.
So if you look at the note, here the note says your next of kin are the exiles, the people who've already been exiled.
Say then, Thus said the sovereign God, I have indeed removed them far among the nations, and have scattered them among the countries, and I have become to them a diminished sanctity in the countries whither they have gone.
Yeah, so you guys are actually the ones who get to survive.
Yet say, Thus said the sovereign God, I will gather you from the peoples, and assemble you out of the countries where you have been scattered, and I will give you the land of Israel, and they shall return there and do away with all its detestable things and all its abominations.
Yeah, let's finish this up and we'll explain.
I will give them one heart and put a new spirit in them. I will remove the heart of stone from their bodies and give them a heart of flesh, that they may follow my laws and faithfully observe my rules. Then they shall be my people, and I will be their God. But as for them whose heart is set upon their detestable things and their abominations, I will repay them for their conduct, declares the sovereign God. Then the cherubs with the wheels beside them lifted their wings, while the presence of the God of Israel rested above them. The presence of God ascended from the midst of the city and stood on the hill east of the city. A spirit carried me away and brought me in a vision by the Spirit of God to the exile community in Chaldea. Then the vision that I had seen left me, and I told the exiles all the things that God had shown me.
Yeah. So now you can see why I wanted to get to the end of it. It couldn't just end before we read that part. So first of all, this vision that he has of Jerusalem and the destruction is not for the people of Jerusalem. It was for the exiles. I told the exiles all the things that God had shown me. So he sees it all. It's in his mind, vision, whatever. He had this amazing experience. But it's for the people who have already been exiled. He's telling them the good word, the good news, which is you guys are going to come back.
Yeah.
You're the ones who are going to come back and don't do, obviously, what the people we're doing there now were doing. No, these are the people that are already gone. Now, could they have been the ones that he marked originally, or are those more people that are going to be exiled, right? Because there are still people that are going to be exiled, right? There's another exile that's going to happen, which is the exile that Jeremiah is a part of. It's the last exile. It's the exile of the remnant. Now, there were even more people that stayed behind, and we know that because of the Gedaliah revolt, and just common sense tells us that not every Judean got taken away, but the leadership got taken away, the priests all got taken away, the king's family all got taken away, the scribes got taken away. Those people, it seems like for the most part, get taken away. A lot of the soldiers get taken away, though it does say that it seemed like the Gedaliah rebellion was led by soldiers who were left behind. But there are people who are still going to be saved. But the most important thing is that these people will be good people. They will follow my laws and obey my rules. And I will be their people, right? They will be my people, and I will be their God. So the good news is that the people who already are actually out already, they're going to be the majority or the bulk of the leaders who get to come back, or at least their descendants will. So the good news is that it's not going to end up bad. The people will be able to be there. But this vision of God leaving Jerusalem is critical because this allows Jerusalem to be destroyed. Jerusalem now, in Ezekiel's mind, it's over. God's presence won't be there anymore. The interesting question is, does God's presence ever come back? Because there is a real argument within Judaism itself, or not an argument, but different feelings about it. It's not like people sat down and argued over this, but there was real understanding that like maybe the kavod never came back. It never, whatever we rebuilt in Jerusalem was a pale comparison to what this was. That God's presence never came back. There was never a kavod. There was never a presence. Now, that's not uniform. That's not uniformly seen by the rabbis as the answer. And really, in the end, we only have the rabbis take away from this, which is that maybe there was a divine presence there that left when the Romans destroyed it, that there was something there and something left then. It's difficult to say because the people who were there at the time were probably a little bit more hesitant to say, we saw something or we felt something when the temple was destroyed that indicated to us that it was gone.
Are there prophets that prophesize the second destruction of the temple, or mostly that?
Oh yeah, a lot of people, including maybe even Jesus, right? But the people who, and that's why we talked about whether Jesus was a prophet or not, especially on Wednesday night, we discussed that. Whether or not, again, those people were seen as prophets, we didn't consider them prophets because we believe that there were no people who be called prophets after the prophets in the Bible, like Malachi, Haggai, and Zechariah, the last three prophets that we read in our Bible. We basically said there are no more prophets. We can't really call them prophets. They might be very holy, but they're not prophets because God isn't speaking to us through prophecy anymore. If God spoke to us through prophecy, somebody would have to write it down, and it'd have to be in the Bible. And the Bible is done. We're not putting any more books in the Bible. So that would be problematic. But again, it's not that, we said that prophecy ended with those prophets, that those were the last people that God spoke to like a prophet. And that's about 300, 350, whatever, BCE. So that's, if people prophesied about the temple being destroyed, that doesn't mean that we called them prophets. I don't know, maybe people did. I'm not saying like the average Jew didn't say, hey, that guy's a prophet. The rabbis said, we don't call those people prophets in the same way that we have these prophets. God doesn't speak to us in prophecy anymore.
God leaving Jerusalem.
Well, by the way, I just want to say that those prophecies that we have, like Ezekiel and Jeremiah, could apply towards the second temple as well, by the way. I want to make it clear that the rabbis invoked Ezekiel and Jeremiah's visions of the destruction of Jerusalem for their own destruction of Jerusalem.
That's right. And God didn't leave. His presence.
His presence left. So the question is, was there a divine presence in the second temple? Some of the rabbis felt it was there, and others felt it was not there in the first place. It wasn't there to leave. We knew that. Like, we knew that what we were doing there was a continuation of our tradition, but God's presence doesn't come back. Because there's a feeling like when Solomon builds the temple, it's very clear in the book of King that the very beginning, chapter 5, it says that God's presence inhabited that place. The Kavod Adonai was there. We don't get that when the temple is built the second time. We don't get a moment where it says, and God's presence filled the place. So we don't have that definitively said. So there's no moment where the temple is built and they go, and by the way, the moment that the temple is built isn't really clear in our Bible. It's not built like once. It's like it's built and they kind of build it and they build a little bit more and they're like, are the Persians going to let us finish this building? We'll get to it, trust me. But even as you read it, you're like, but when does it finish? Like, was there a date when we're like, oh, it's all done? It doesn't really seem that way. It doesn't seem like it was ever like officially, hey, it's all done now. And guess what? It doesn't matter because King Herod literally rebuilt it from the bottom brick up. He rebuilt the temple.
With the second temple,
The second temple was really the third temple. The Romans destroyed what effectively was the third building. And maybe not even the third building. It could have been the fourth or fifth building there. Based on the Persian period, it's not really clear.
the Ark of the Covenant.
The Ark of the Covenant is definitely not there. And what's interesting about Herod is, was the kavod somewhere hanging around while he was rebuilding it? Where was it while he was rebuilding it? Like, was there Holy of Holies and then they go, okay, the Holy of Holies is done, now let's move it over here? I don't know. I mean, it's very weird to think that they rebuilt it and that clearly they were still doing sacrifices while it was being rebuilt. But it was like one of those rebuilding, situations where they had to rebuild it while they were still in the house. Like, you hear about hotels being remodeled and they remodel those sections and they remodel those floors and you're like, I don't want to be on that floor below it while they're remodeling it, right? I don't want to, or be above it while they're remodeling. I don't want to hear that. But you know that that you can hear that, you can see that they're remodeling it. But it's a weird thing to think about how they remodeled it while they were doing it.
The cathedrals in Europe, they're working on them, or even the one in New York, they're working on them all the time.
Yes, there are a lot of buildings, especially religious buildings and universities
like
and houses.
Notre Dame is having to be rebuilt.
But there's other times where again you're like, but how did you possibly work out of there while they're rebuilding it? You got to shut it down.
Well, they were, and what I'm saying is they were used to it. That's the way they always did it.
The building codes back.
But was there a point where they're like, okay, we have a new Holy of Holies, let's open up the new Holy of Holies? Because clearly it wasn't the same Holy of Holies.
There's nothing put in there.
I understand, but there was a wall, right? There were walls for the nothing that was there. There were still walls for it. Did they like build it and like did parts of it? Like, how did they even do that? Only the Kohen Gadol was supposed to go in there. At what moment does the Kohen Gadol go, okay, now it's ready to go? Was it behind it?
You find a couple of sons of Aaron and they go in there and that makes it deconsecrated and then you can move it.
How do you do that?
So did God destroy the Torah, everything got destroyed? Like,
Where was the stuff? Where was
the ark?
The ark
You
was
can figure out where the ark is
the
when
ark
you do.
wasn't there when it got destroyed. That's the thing. We don't know where the ark is when this is being
when you say
destroyed.
ark, I'm just thinking of a cabinet, but you're talking about
The Ark of the Covenant was not in the building when the Babylonians destroyed it.
which had all
It had the Ten Commandments.
the scrolls.
Had the Ten Commandments.
Templar
They had whoever has it. The Ethiopians say they have it. Whoever has it,
That church in England?
it's in Egypt. Wherever it is, we don't know where but it wasn't there. It wasn't in the Yes, it wasn't there when it happened. When the Babylonians come in and destroy it, it wasn't there. There's no record of it. It doesn't say that it was there. We know it wasn't there. Well, was that the most important thing? But that wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was the Kavod Adonai. The Kavod was what actually we care about. Was the Kavod there in the Second Temple? The rabbis they're not definitive.
Well,
There's
according
people
to Indiana
there's
Jones,
people
it
on
was with
both.
the ark, wherever the ark is.
Well, that's true. The Kavod Adonai was in the ark, which is why they get melted when they open it up. But it's not really. It's there, which he did, and he built based on Jewish sources. It's the Shekhinah, Because when the Shekhinah comes out, it actually comes out a little bit like the feminine face of God too. Look, the commentaries that some of you have the word Shekhinah in there, that the kavod is the Shekhinah. I don't know, maybe it is, but it doesn't, I mean, that's not what it said. It didn't say the Shekhinah, it said the kavod. They definitely use those terms I don't know if they exactly, I don't know if we always think about it that way or whoever thinks about it. The Shekhinah is used in the commentaries, and because I saw it in some of your commentaries, it says the Shekhinah. I think your commentary said Shekhinah. All I can tell you is that the word that he uses is the word kavod. It definitely seems like a cloud. It definitely seems like something that can take a divine human type appearance, anthropomorphic. I don't know what to tell you other than what at least Ezekiel says is that this kavod has some type of body. But I don't know. That's what we read. It gives us more things to think about or dream about. But when we come back, we will be reading more about what Ezekiel says to the community that he is preaching to. So thank you, everybody. I know we went over a little bit, but we really couldn't cut off that vision of Jerusalem that he had just now. A lot to think about. All right, everybody. We will see you hopefully for Sukkot in the coming days during this time of joy. So we will see you soon. Chag Sameach, everybody.
Chag
Sameach.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Thank
For
you.
reading today,
Thank you.
being with us. Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.